What's up, guys? It's Toad. Late night, giving you tomorrow's college football week 3 video. I got 4 plays, which tends to be my average. I don't know if that's just because of my autism, where I just pick like what I think are the 4 best, and it's always 4, 4, 4. It's not always 4, but most of the time it is. For whatever reason, that winds up being the case. We're going with 4 plays again this week. Which it is week 3, so you think that maybe I would have fewer plays because a lot of the FBS, a lot of the big conference teams are playing like lesser teams. Some of them are playing FCS teams, so there's kind of less to choose from. Not a lot of huge games as far as like top 25 matchups, but I do tend to find a lot of the games that are kind of like between the mid-majors and stuff to play. So you find those situations, man. Usually it's teams that are like coming off of big games, but now they're playing like a bit of a lesser game or something like that. The sandwich spots, right? You have a team that's coming off a big game and they might have another big game next. We're looking for sandwiches. I got a couple of tasty sandwiches on the menu this week, as I tend to do. And I'm fresh off losing my baseball streak, so what can you do? I had 6 wins in a row and lost the later game tonight. I went 1-1 tonight, but because the Chicago Cubs was a plus money play on the run line, I wound up still having a slight win tonight, which, I mean, I'll take it, I guess. The Cubs looked decent early, but they gave up some runs. They still had chances to do it and come away with the win and maybe even the cover of the run line in that one, but wound up not being so, unfortunately. I guess I should stop taking these public road favorites, I guess. I don't know. I thought it was the right spot for it, though. I liked it. As you could see if you saw my analysis on today's video, I did get the under right in the Dodgers-Braves game, so that one was a winner for me. Let's talk about college football. We did have those 2 games tonight, which I was correct on the one that I had more faith in, which was Kansas State. I'm kind of mad that I didn't play it, actually, because I did like that side, but I just didn't think it was that strong. But oh man, did they pull that off? They blew out Arizona, holding Arizona to 7 points. That's just crazy, man. Kansas State, pretty good defensively, I suppose. Whew. All right, let's talk about some of these other games here of the week. You have games. The only other top 25 matchup, I mean, that was a top 25 matchup between 2 top 25 teams. The other one is only a top 25 matchup in the rankings alone, because if you're a professional bettor, man, you follow the power rankings, power ratings, you do not have Boston College, even though I do like them. I'm not even wearing my BC hat this time, man, because I have no faith in them. I don't think that they're a top 25 team. I'm sorry. I mean, I think they're a decent team. They have a decent dual threat quarterback there. Their defense plays decently. They usually have a decent running game going on there, but this BC-Missouri game, I mean, this is a mismatch, dude. I'm sorry. BC, they are only ranked in the top 25 right now because they beat Florida State, and Florida State was ranked very highly, but we don't even know how good Florida State is. They've had so much turnover coming into the season. I think Florida State, I mean, clearly they started the season overrated, but they might have been severely overrated to start the season, man. I don't think that Florida State is anywhere near as good as they started the season. So I think that BC win over them, even though it was a pretty good win, I don't know that it's as good as it looks on the surface. So I don't love BC coming into this, man. And you could maybe even consider them to be in a letdown spot, even though they had another game after the Florida State game, but that was just a complete cupcake, and Duquesne, who is an FCS team, and BC annihilated them 56-0. So that looks like a good win. It makes BC still look good, but can you really take anything away from them slaughtering Duquesne? I don't really think so. Missouri, on the other hand, ranked 6th in the country, and I think that they are legitimately a top 10 team at the very least. And Missouri, yeah, they blew out Murray State, who was also an FCS team, so I don't know what you can really take from that. And then they beat Buffalo, who is an FBS team, but a MAC team, not a very good one. So, yeah, Missouri hasn't faced tough opponents either, but they shut them both out and have not allowed a point yet. So I do think that Missouri, they do have a legit defense, man, because if you're playing these games that you don't even really care about that much and you still don't allow any points, I do think that this is a legitimate team. Even though you might argue that, well, they look too good right now, I still lean to the Missouri side in this one. Their down actually from 15.5 to 14.5. 52% of the tickets on them, but only 51% of the cash. So strange that Missouri, I mean, I would expect them to be slightly public like they are, but I wouldn't expect them to have less of the cash on them. I wouldn't expect the market to be indicating sort of against them, which it looks like it is here. And the total has gone down a little bit from 55 to 53, although 51% of the tickets on the under, 54% of the cash on the over. I don't know. So it's not really a high total, which tends to be kind of a type of game where you want to look to take the underdog more so, but I don't like this. I don't like it for BC, man. They're definitely significantly worse than Missouri is. Both teams can play defense a bit, but Missouri's, I think, is very much a shutdown defense, and BC is not used to playing at Missouri. This is unfamiliar territory to them, and I believe it's their first. Is it their first true road game or no? Because I guess they won at Florida State, right? I think they did. I won't look it up, but I think even if it's not, I think traveling to Missouri and having to play on the road at Missouri, that's just tough, man. So I do lean to the Missouri side in that one, but obviously it's not a play for me. It's not a very strong lean for me there. Alabama's playing Wisconsin. I mean, this is an interesting game. This is one of the more interesting matchups. I'll talk about a few of these other big games. Alabama, I mean, they're looking pretty good to start the season for the most part, blowing out Western Kentucky, who is an FBS team as well, and not really a bad one. I mean, they've been a decent program getting into bowls and stuff, but I believe that their quarterback last year was Austin Hill. Is that his name? He's the third stringer for the Chicago Bears right now, or he's on the practice squad right now. So he is no longer there. He got drafted, obviously. Or I don't know if he went undrafted, but he is in the NFL now, and he's no longer at Western Kentucky, obviously. So I don't know. Western Kentucky does have some turnover there. Alabama then had that rematch against South Florida, where South Florida played that ugly, low-scoring game against Alabama last year and kept the game close, and people were like, what is wrong with Alabama? And yeah, Alabama had a slightly down year, but they still made the college football playoff because they beat Georgia. Oh boy, and they do have Georgia up next, so that is a big game. I think it's a bigger game for Georgia, though, which I can talk about in a minute. But that is still a big game looming on the horizon, but it's in 2 weeks. They do have a bye next week, so both Alabama and Georgia have a bye next week. So they'll both be coming into that game off of a bye, and it'll be one of the big games of the college football season, of course, and it will be revenge for Georgia, which is something I will mention in a minute. But Alabama, I mean, they sort of got themselves a better game this time against South Florida, but this game actually was closer for a while. I mean, look at that. Into the fourth quarter, Alabama was only winning by 5 points with not much time left, with 5 minutes left, and then they wound up just pouring it on with 3 straight touchdowns late to make it look like a blowout when it really wasn't. So is Alabama maybe not quite as good as they look? I mean, that final score is a little bit misleading. And I think Wisconsin's kind of flying under the radar right now, man. I mean, Wisconsin's had some coaching turnover there and stuff like that, and they've been kind of changing their offensive style to kind of more of a passing offense, and now they think they have Van Dyke there, who was the quarterback at Miami. I think he is at Wisconsin now. So Wisconsin kind of changing what they look like offensively, or they're not totally like a ground and pound team anymore, although I think they still do run the ball pretty well and play good defense. And I lean to Wisconsin in this one, man. Alabama's up from 15 to 16. They are public, 71% of tickets, 76% of the cash. So the money looks like it's coming in a little bit more on Alabama and driving that line up. But this total's down to 48.5, a fairly low total. To be laying that many points on the road, man, when you're in this position like Alabama, and I think you look better than you are based off of your previous 2 games results so far. And again, Wisconsin, I think, is kind of flying under the radar here. And it's a low total, so I kind of like the home underdog in that scenario, man. I think the crowd's going to be crazy at Wisconsin, and it's not a situation where that Alabama's really that used to. And Wisconsin's coming off not looking very good in these first 2 games against Western Michigan and South Dakota, so they are kind of playing ugly offense. It almost looks like the Wisconsin style of old, where it's like, we beat you, we don't allow that many points to you, but we win kind of ugly, and that's what they've done so far. So I think you're not going to get value playing Alabama, man, in a game like this, even though the market does look like it has some indicators on their side. I obviously wouldn't agree with it. So I lean against Alabama there. You have a big game here with LSU and South Carolina. LSU hasn't looked that great so far. They started the season losing to USC, but that's a tough game. I mean, both teams ranked pretty high to start the season. They're both really good programs, but LSU's defense has been struggling, man. And then they give up 21 points to Nichols in a win, but Nichols, not a very good FCS team there. So allowing 21 doesn't really speak very highly to your defense. I think LSU is still struggling defensively like they were last year. And they're going on the road to South Carolina. But South Carolina is a team that I had last week because they played real ugly in their first game against Old Dominion. But then they crushed Kentucky last week. This South Carolina defense I do think is for real. So in this case, even though South Carolina looked good last week, they're coming off a really good-looking win, and LSU's coming off kind of an ugly win, which would kind of put me on the LSU side just because you tend to want to be on the team that looked uglier in the previous game. That's where you tend to find some value. But in this case, I'm not so sure because LSU is the ranked team on the road, so they're probably going to be the public team. I mean, they're considered to be the bigger program. I don't think people are going to really look at this Kentucky win by South Carolina and draw that many conclusions from it. But what I'm going to draw from it is that South Carolina actually plays solid defense, even though they are kind of having some turnover this year on their offense from the offense that they had prior to that. But this is a legit South Carolina defense as far as I can tell. And they have the better defense, and they're at home, and they're getting points here. So that might actually be the better way to look as far as the side is concerned. LSU has dropped from 7.5 to 6, 63% of the tickets on them, and 70% of the cash, though, it looks like. So a little bit more of the cash. I'm not so sure that that's much of an indicator there. I do think that because the line has dropped like this and LSU is public, I do think, and I do know, I've heard some professionals talking about this game and being on the South Carolina side there. I just don't love it just because South Carolina is coming off that big win, but I don't think South Carolina is going to be unfocused when they have LSU coming into their house. That's still another big game. So it's more of a matter of can they keep up that level of intensity multiple weeks in a row. But because they won in such a blowout last week, it's more of a case where it's like, will they be in a letdown just because they feel so high on themselves after that? So I don't think so, because I think you'll still be able to, you won't be as high on yourselves when you have a big team like LSU coming in. You'll probably be focused because of that. And because that game wasn't that intense a game, they won it way too easily against Kentucky. I don't think South Carolina will like run out of steam by the end of this game or whatever the case may be there. Florida State, they're hosting Memphis, and I actually think you're getting a little bit of value on Florida State because they've looked like total ass basically in these first two games. And yes, that game was at home against BC. But I mean, what can we really draw from this? I mean, Florida State came into the season basically changing their entire offense. You know, I went against them in week 0, which was that Ireland game against Georgia Tech. Then Florida State had a bad game again against BC. And then I believe, did they have a bye between those? They had a bye after the BC game, I guess, right? Yeah, they've been off for a long time. So now Florida State's had a lot of time to kind of regather themselves. So this, like, long time off, this is going to function I think this is going to serve them well, man. I think this is going to allow them to refocus when they're 0-2 like this, even though they're probably thinking, well, we're eliminated from playoff contention already. I still think that they're going to be mad about these two losses, man, and it'll still serve to focus them, and they'll use that time to figure something out. And now they're playing, excuse me, a far inferior Memphis team here. Florida State is up from 5 to 7, though, so you're going to have to lay. The key number is 7 now. I don't know. There were 6.5 still out there a little while back. I don't know if there still are. They got 53% of the tickets, so the public isn't even loving Florida State anymore because they've dropped from the rankings and they haven't won a game yet, and they've looked so bad, and they've basically been the laughing stock since they lost to BC. So, I mean, if anything else, they're going to be, I think, playing for pride here. They're going to be angry that people are just making fun of them to such a degree after that BC game. Public is off of them, and I do think it'll motivate Florida State a little bit after that. And they have 60% of the cash on them, so more of the cash. So I do lean to Florida State in that one. Memphis coming off, an unimpressive win, even though they did win 40-0. It's Northern Alabama. It's Northern Alabama. I mean, that doesn't matter really. And then they did beat Troy, who have been a good program, but I think they've had turnover on their offense coming into this year, so I don't know how good they are this year really. Still a decent win for them, but still, Florida State, I still think is the better team, as the odds makers are telling you, and I think they're probably better by more of a margin than what the odds makers are telling you there. So that is the way I lean in that one. And then I don't even know what else we got here. I mean, what else is there to talk about? There are a couple of rivalry games here. There's Oregon State, which is in the afternoon. I don't even know how to read this game, man. I mean, Oregon's dropped in the rankings a little bit just because they haven't looked good. They played 2 ugly games so far. As a big favorite in both of these games, they were big favorites and had close calls against Idaho and Boise. And now they have to go out on the road where you're going to, Cornwallis, General Cornwallis. It's going to be the surrender at Yorktown. No, I think it's Corvallis, Oregon is where Oregon State is. I mean, the Oregon State crowd always gets pumped up for that, but Oregon State is also both of these teams are having turnover on their offenses as well. They both have new quarterbacks this year too, I believe. But it's always a tough environment to go into, but Oregon is still the better of these two teams, and they've looked not great in these first 2 games. But I think Boise is actually a pretty formidable opponent this year. And that first game, I don't know if I would draw that many conclusions from that first game that Oregon played. I think Oregon outplayed Idaho statistically more than what the final score suggests. If I remember correctly, yeah, they totally dominated yardage, first down, so I don't know why that game was as close as it was. So I think Oregon is probably better than what they looked in those first 2 games. Oregon State, I'm really not sure what we're even going to get out of this team. This is one of the 2 teams who's just sitting around, still remaining in the Pac-12, but it might serve to focus Oregon State more. It might pump Oregon State up more. And Oregon State's played a couple of games that don't look that impressive either, although shutting San Diego State out, kind of impressive, I guess. It's shutting out an FBS team that usually is a decent program there, but San Diego State has had offensive struggles for a couple of years now. Their offense has not been rebuilt. What's up, JC? How did I know you were going to be in here? You somehow find all the streams, even though I'm streaming at some random time late at night, and you have no idea when I'm even actually going to do it. But you find it, you're here. Thanks, man. Thanks for showing up. But yeah, Oregon State, I don't even remember what my train of thought was. And I know I was going to say that Oregon State, just because they're one of the teams that's remaining in this ruins of the Pac-12 here with just them and Washington State, they might have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder because Oregon's one of the guys that bailed on the Pac-12 and left the Pac-12 and went to, I don't even know where the hell Oregon is now. Are they in Big Ten now? I don't even know where Oregon is now. They're either in the Big 12, Big 10. I don't even know where they went. I got to figure that out. But Oregon State might have a little bit of an extra chip on their shoulder because of that at the very least. So this one is tough to read for me. Oregon's up from 14 to 17. And it does look like Oregon State is actually very public, I guess because Oregon has looked really, really ugly in those first 2 games and has not lived up to the expectations so far, even though they have won both games. 73% of the tickets are on Oregon State, so they are public. Scoreboard don't lie. What's up? And Nancy, what is up? Hello, everyone. Everybody's showing up on a Friday night. Don't you guys have anything better to do than to watch me autistically talk about football? I haven't even gotten into my actual plays yet, though, and that's where the juice is. That's where the meat actually is here. But, yeah, Oregon, they're up to 17 with juice, speaking of juice. So it looks like the market is actually strongly indicating on Oregon here. I don't know that I'd want to actually lay that many points on the road against an Oregon State team that I said might actually be playing with a bit of a chip on their shoulder because Oregon bailed on the conference. But 73% of the tickets are on Oregon State, so they're getting a lot of the public activity, it looks like, and only 57% of the cash. So the pure market read there disagrees with the Oregon State side, seemingly pretty significantly to drive this lineup like this to against that amount of tickets. So Oregon appears to be the lean in that one. You got West Virginia, Pittsburgh as a rivalry game. That's always a big game. That's the backyard brawl. Those teams both usually show up, and there's a lot of tailgating. They're close geographically, so the fans of the road team always travel in that one as well. That's going to be a wild one. I don't know what we can expect out of this one. I mean, pure market read looks like it is on Pittsburgh. If you read the market here, West Virginia is a road favorite for some reason here, down though from 2.5 to 2. 61% of the tickets, so the public does kind of like Pittsburgh a little bit, but 73% of the cash also on Pitt. I would just lean by default to where the market is indicating on that one, just because I don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other. Otherwise, So looking at West Virginia here, I mean, they had that bad loss to start the season against Penn State, and that was really the only game. That's probably why the public doesn't want anything to do with West Virginia, because they remember just West Virginia let people down really and got blown out by Penn State in that first game. They let a lot of bettors down at the very least. I know that. There were a lot of professional bettors taking the points with West Virginia in that one. And then West Virginia beat an FCS team in Albany. No one cares about that. But it does mean that they had an easy game last week, whereas I think Pitt actually had a more difficult game last week, at least against an FBS team. And it was a close game against Cincinnati, and that's kind of a big game too, man. Pitt and Cincinnati, I mean, they're kind of close geographic rivals to some extent as well. So Pitt actually had the more difficult game and had to put in more effort last week. So I'm not necessarily sure that I would actually want to play Pitt in this game. I mean, I'm not going to do it, but the market does seem to be indicating on Pitt. But they did have the more difficult game than West Virginia did last week, and West Virginia has looked worse than Pitt has so far this year. What else we got here on the slate? Utah, this is an interesting one, man. This was close to being a play for me. I lean against Utah. I think this is a sandwich spot that Utah is in here. I don't like the Utah side in this one, but there is kind of one big factor that's keeping me away from the Utah side here. Utah is coming off beating Baylor, and that might not look that good because Baylor's kind of been a down program recently, but I would say that that is big because Utah, if I'm not mistaken, this is their first season in the Big 12, right? I believe they were in the Pac-12 until it essentially dissolved at the end of last year, right? If I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so Utah was in the Pac-12 last year. You can see their schedule there. So that is a big game for them, man. That was their conference home opener in the new conference for them, the Big 12, and they got a win to start Big 12 play last week. That's a big win, man. You beat one of the teams that's been in the Big 12 for a while, Baylor. You are new to the conference and you beat them. Yeah, that's a big game. And they have another conference game up on deck, two games that are pretty big because they're both against ranked teams, but they have a big road Big 12 matchup at Oklahoma State, who's one of the better teams in the Big 12, up next week. So I think Utah State is in a sandwich spot, and I think they could look, or Utah, excuse me, is in a sandwich spot, and they could look past Utah State. And this is a situation where Utah State is the little brother in the state of Utah. Utah has been the better team for a while. They still are, as they're ranked number 12. Utah State, I think, always plays with a little bit more of a chip on their shoulder. They consider themselves to be the little brother in the state of Utah. So they have that little brother versus big brother motivational aspect to that game. So I think for that reason, Utah State would also be the side that I would want in this one. And Utah State's coming off just a hideous-looking loss to USC, so that doesn't look good either. But USC is not a terrible team, but Utah State, I mean, that was not a good showing for them. And Utah State, they're not a great team this year, so they're going to be a big underdog in a lot of these games, and they are again, but they're a home underdog this time. So all of that, you're saying, well, why am I not playing on Utah State here? Utah is down from 21.5 to 18 with juice. They got 64% of the tickets on them, so Utah's public, because of course they are. I mean, they're the ranked team. Everybody wants to play the team that they perceive as the better team, and sure, Utah is definitely the better team. There's no question there. Utah State has 70% of the cash on them, though, and the line is dropped on them. However, I think part of the reason for this line movement and the reason why I don't want to play Utah State here is that Utah, I believe, just lost their quarterback to tetanus. It's a weird situation, man, but they have a really experienced quarterback who I think is in like his 8th year or 7th year or something like that. Like, I don't know how he's played that many years. I don't know how many times you're allowed to redshirt or whatever the case is. I don't know how he's been in college football for that long, but he has been. He's a very experienced quarterback, and he is not playing in this game because he has tetanus. So then you might say, well, then isn't that even more of a reason to play Utah State? I would say no, because when a team loses their star player like that, they lose their quarterback like that, that's part of the reason why the line then has to drop on that team. So that means you're actually going to get less value on the Utah side because of that. So Utah might actually step up for that because they know their quarterback is out. That first game that their quarterback is out, the team might like rally around that backup quarterback. It's the injured player theory, basically, that I talk about a lot, especially in football, where when that star player goes down, the line has to move, and it usually overreacts a little bit to that star player being out, and the team in that first game usually steps up their level of play steps up the momentum. What's up, Andre? I see a bunch of you people in the chat, man. Thanks for joining. It's going to be my most viewed video so far, and it's stupid college football, right? So, but that's the reason I don't want to play Utah, is because I think some of this line movement is not actual movement, like just because of where the market is going. I think it's because the odds makers had to like actually move the line to that extent because Utah's quarterback is out. At least I believe that is the case. I don't think I'm totally mistaken, right? I think that's the case. Let me just make sure. Did he play in this game? I think he did. Yeah, I don't even remember. I think it was, Cam Rising. I guess it's him. It says hand injury. I'm pretty sure it is tetanus, though. I don't know what is going on. What were they? Were they playing with a rusty steel football or something? I don't know what the deal is there, but I'm pretty sure it is tetanus. It's a weird situation. So I'm just going to stay off of it, but it is, scheduling-wise, it is a bad spot for Utah. So I will leave it at that. What else can we talk about here? I don't know what else we have for any games that might be big. I think there is a big game between Washington and Washington State, right? Where's that at? I don't know where that's at, but Washington is playing against Washington State somewhere in here, which is another one of the rivalry games. Yeah, there it is. Washington State is at Washington, but I don't know why I'm even talking about it. I mean, other than the fact that it's a rivalry game, I don't really have that much else to say about this because both of these teams have massive turnover. I mean, Washington State's quarterback was Cam Ward last year. I believe he is now at Miami, I believe. So they have a new quarterback this year. Washington, of course, lost their head coach. DeBoer, I think is his name, from last year. Of course, Washington made the championship last year, and then basically the entire team is now gone. So their coach went to Alabama. Their quarterback was Penix. He is in the NFL now, I believe, with Atlanta Falcons, I think, is where he is. And they lost, like, their main, like, wide receivers and stuff like that. Odunze, I think, was their big wide receiver. He's on the Chicago Bears. And, I think their running back might be gone as well. So a lot of turnover on both sides here. Very difficult to gauge what's going to happen in this game. Washington State had a win where they cost me money, basically, or Texas Tech cost me money last week. I thought it was a bad spot, man, because Washington State, I thought, was going to be looking ahead to this big rivalry game, and Texas Tech was coming off a really bad performance against a really bad Abilene Christian team. So I don't know what that was, and Texas Tech just proved me wrong. I guess Texas Tech's defense just sucks. So I don't know. Washington State putting up 37 against that horrific a defense, yeah, I don't know that there's much to really take away from that or think about that. I don't think that highly of Washington State, really. And, of course, Washington State is that other team besides Oregon State that's in that remains of the Pac-12, which is the Pac-2 now. Just those two teams. So does that mean that Washington State is going to be kind of playing in that, like, little bit of a, like, angry mood, basically, because they're playing up against one of the other teams that is now gone from the conference? Washington is in the Big Ten now. I don't know, man. And Oregon is also in the Big Ten, which is what I think I thought. I think I said that, so that answers that question. So I don't know if that means Washington State's going to have a little bit extra motivation because of that. I don't know. This is a home game for Washington. Washington's coming off an easy win over Eastern Michigan. It wasn't very good. They are an FBS team, but this game, out of all the games I've talked about, I think this is the one that I have the least gauge on. Washington is up from 4 to 5.5, so the odds maker's telling you, despite all the turnover, Washington is actually still better than Washington State, which is probably why Washington State is still sitting in that piece of crap Pac-2 there. None of the other conferences wanted them. I'm sorry, Washington State. 67% of the tickets on Washington, 68% of the cash on Washington. So a little bit more of the cash on Washington. Yeah, who the hell gets tetanus? I don't know, man. JC is saying it's related to the vaccines. Oh, well, yeah, like it's another thing it's made up to push vaccines. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I just had a physical not that long ago, and they, like, always ask, like, do you want your tetanus shot? You want an updated tetanus shot? I'm like, no. Like, what am I going to do? Am I going to go step on a rusty nail? I do computer programming, man. I'm not at risk for tetanus. I don't know. I seriously have no idea how Utah's quarterback got tetanus, but I'm pretty sure that is Utah's quarterback. You can go look it up. I might be wrong, but I think I'm right. There's a lot to try to keep straight in my head, man. So hopefully I'm right about that. I think I am. But that was, the reason why I wasn't going to completely jump on that one. But I did like the Utah State side scheduling-wise, so that was close to being a play. Another one that's close to a play is Kentucky. I think this is a decent spot for Kentucky against Georgia, but Georgia is obviously the way better team, so Georgia is going to be a huge favorite here. But this is not an easy spot for Georgia, which I was alluding to when I talked about Alabama a little while ago. Georgia is in a spot where they're facing, this is their first road game of the season, so that's usually a difficult spot, even if you are used to playing. It's another conference opponent here, so it's not like they're not used to going to Kentucky and playing there. They play there every other year or whatever, so it's not going to be that much of a bad spot just because of that, but still, the first true road game is always a little bit difficult. Georgia's coming off beating Tennessee Tech. Who cares about that? I mean, they looked really good in their opener against Clemson, but I think Clemson was overrated to start the season. I've talked about Clemson repeatedly, where Dabo Swinney just refuses to go out and get transfers. I think Clemson and Florida State, they were both massively overrated to start the season, so I don't know that Georgia, I don't know that you can really read that much into that win, although I do still think Georgia's probably the best team in college football, but that doesn't mean that they're just going to cover every single game. Far from it. It means that you're probably not going to find value laying the points with Georgia most of the time because they're going to be a huge favorite in most games. So they're playing at Kentucky here, but look at what they have up next, man, which is what I alluded to with Alabama. That is a huge game for Georgia. Georgia does have a bye next week, and so does Alabama, and then they play the week after that. But I think if either team is going to be looking ahead to that one, Georgia is going to be the team more likely to be looking ahead to that. They're going to have that game circled, dude, because you know what happened last year, right? Georgia was undefeated. They were headed for the playoffs again. They had won 2 championships in a row. It looked like they were headed for another championship. I think they were probably still the best team in college football last year, but they lost the SEC championship to Alabama. Georgia was, I think, like a 4-point favorite or something, and they lost the game. Alabama knocked them out of the playoffs entirely, which you can debate whether Georgia should have been in or not. We now have an expanded playoff this year, so that situation is going to be less likely to happen where you have like the team that's probably the best team in football not even getting in. That's not going to happen again, but Georgia, I think they're going to be angry after that, man. That's one of the types of revenge spots that does matter. Revenge is, overstated in most cases, but when it was something like that where Alabama was the reason that Georgia didn't get into the playoff last year and didn't get to take their shot to try to three-peat, Georgia is going to be pissed off, and they're going to have that game massively circled. That's going to be like their biggest game of the year, basically, going to Alabama. So it is possible Georgia just overlooks Kentucky here. And as I already mentioned when I talked about South Carolina a little while ago, Kentucky's coming off a blowout loss against South Carolina, so they're probably in an embarrassed mood as well. And Kentucky got blown out by Georgia last year. And if you remember, as I mentioned last week, Kentucky was 5-0 to start the season last year. Then they went to Georgia, and they got absolutely annihilated by Georgia. And I think Kentucky's going to remember that, and they're going to have this game circled. So this game matters more to Kentucky, I think, than it does to Georgia. Georgia's got a bigger game up next with Alabama, so it is a look-ahead spot. In Kentucky, I think they're going to be in a pissed-off mood because they got blown out last week, and maybe they were looking ahead to this game, which was part of the reason why I went against Kentucky last week. I had a nice win on South Carolina on the show last week. This is a spot where Kentucky, I think, is going to show up way more focused in this one. But then the question really is, like, Georgia is so good that are they just so much better than Kentucky that Georgia's going to be able to name the score? That's kind of the issue here. But Georgia is down from 23.5 to 22 with juice. 90% of the tickets. So the public not even fazed, I guess, by laying a huge amount of points, seeing basically what the team's results have been so far. They're just laying it with Georgia anyway, but only 75% of the cash. So the market read on this one says to take the points with Kentucky. I also say that I lean that way. It's not going to make my card, but it is one of the closest. JC, the odds makers. Yeah, the odds makers. We know who they are. We notice. They control all the money flow, man. Yeah, so that's a game where I do lean to Kentucky, and that was one of the ones that just misses being a play for me, I would say. So I do like the Kentucky side in that one. And before I get into my actual plays, what was I going to say here? Oh, no. I was going to talk about one other game, and I forget what it was now. I don't remember what it was. I was going to mention, Cal against San Diego State. This is also close to being a play for me on the San Diego State side. Cal's coming off a big win, dude. They went into SEC territory, a road game at Auburn, and that's a difficult game, man. That is a difficult spot. Cal, their opening season in the ACC, had to go face an SEC team, and they won outright as like a double-digit underdog against against Auburn. Big win for Cal. They were an 11.5-point underdog, so I think Cal is probably in a letdown spot here, and then they are in a sandwich spot as well because they open ACC play next week against Florida State. So this is a bad spot for Cal, dude. This is definitely a sandwich spot coming off a big double-digit upset of an SEC team, and they got their first ACC game as a member of the ACC up next against Florida State. But because this is sort of their like de facto home opener, because I don't know if they consider that UC Davis game to really be an official home opener because that's an FCS team. This is their first home game against an FBS team. I don't know. Does that mean that they're going to be focused on this? I don't really know, but I do lean against Cal because the spot is still really bad for Cal. This one is the closest to being a play for me that isn't on my card right now, and I don't know if I'm actually going to play it. San Diego State, of course, as I mentioned, got shut out by Oregon State. And this is a big game for San Diego State, really, just because they're playing a bigger brother in the state of California here, going up to the University of California. San Diego State has been a good program for a long time in football, but they've kind of dropped off a little bit in recent years. So even though I think there were seasons where they were better than Cal for a while, I think they do consider themselves to be the little brother again. So I do think they're going to step it up for that reason, and because they're embarrassed probably because they got shut out by Oregon State last week. And I think, correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think San Diego State is one of those teams. They just announced that a bunch of teams are joining the Pac-12 next year. So the Pac-12 is adding teams and kind of rebuilding and reforming. I think San Diego State is one of those teams. I might be wrong about that. So they basically had a preview matchup there against Oregon State and really did terribly. I don't know if I trust San Diego State's offense here coming into this one, but the market read, I think, is all over the San Diego State side here. California's 17.5-point favorite, 72% of the tickets on them. Everybody likes the fact that I guess they're undefeated, and they saw that they went in and beat Auburn last week. Big win for Cal. San Diego State, on the other hand, like I said, had an ugly loss there. And they were at home. I'm not even sure that they were an underdog in that game. They might have been a favorite, right? No, Oregon State was a 5-point favorite. Never mind, 5.5. So San Diego State, I guess, is that bad that they were a 5.5-point underdog at home. Man, they've really dropped off because I thought against this Oregon State team, I thought maybe it would have been closer to like a pick-em line. Oregon State was a 5.5-point favorite in that one. So I don't know if I can actually bring myself to play this San Diego State team that just struggles massively offensively, but they have 52% of the cash on them, 72% of the tickets on the Cal side, and Cal's in a really bad spot. So if I were to rate those games that I just said were just left off of my card, I think San Diego State plus 17.5 or whatever is the best of those. And then I would probably still say Utah State and then Kentucky, just because I think Kentucky is still in such a mismatch there that it's really hard to actually bring yourself to play them. Did I shoot my shot with the Walking Bets chick yet? The chick with the big bouncing boobs, Taylor or whatever. I did not. Clint, I believe, shot a shot and said, hey, you should team up with my buddy Toad here, and she completely ignored it, probably because she took one look at my channel and said, fuck that. That's probably what happened. All right, I'm 40 minutes into this video, and I've talked about all these other games, and I have not even talked about my actual plays yet. So how about I do that, right? If you got any questions about any of these other games, I mean, you can go ahead and ask me. I don't know. I mean, Notre Dame, Purdue, I guess, is a big game, too. Notre Dame's down from 12.5 to 7.5. 53% of the tickets on them. 58% of the cash is on Notre Dame. The line is plummeted on Notre Dame, which I think might just be an overreaction to Notre Dame playing really poorly so far. Notre Dame, I would not fade Notre Dame in the spot coming off a game where they lost just totally embarrassingly to Northern Illinois, which I do think Notre Dame also is a team that was overrated coming into the season. They're usually overvalued, but if this line's down to 7.5, and I don't know if Purdue's really that good a program, but Purdue does consider themselves to be the little brother against Notre Dame, I think, in the state of Indiana, just because Notre Dame has more of a history there, more of a football history, more of a track record in football. So Purdue always is going to step it up against Notre Dame. But Notre Dame, coming off that just disgusting loss, is a big favorite against Northern Illinois. I think Notre Dame is not going to be unfocused coming into this one either, and the cash discrepancy looks like it's a little bit on them. So I would not want to fade Notre Dame, even though a lot of times you want to take the points in situation like that where you get a home underdog. Scoreboard don't lie. Her name is Taylor Mathis, I believe is her name. All right, let's get into my plays. We're starting right away, man, at noon tomorrow. So in less than 12 hours, this kicks off. This line has gone up, and I'm playing Central Michigan plus 21. I think this is a sandwich spot, and I like this spot for Central Michigan, or I don't like the spot for Illinois. Illinois is up from 18 to 21 now. So if you waited on this one, which you probably did because you haven't listened to me, and who the hell is going to look at this game at all, ever? 55% of the tickets are on Illinois because Illinois is the Big Ten team, so they're going to draw some of the public action. And people saw them beat a ranked K-State team last week, which I mentioned that. I talked about that game on the show. I didn't play it, but I did lean to Illinois in that one, and I talked about that on the show. So I did have that game right as far as my prediction was concerned. Central Michigan in this game has 59% of the cash on them, however, against this Illinois team. Taking a look at this one, man, I think that this game, I think this is a bad spot for Illinois, dude. Even though playing Central Michigan is pretty ugly because they're a team that can't really score, but you're taking a lot of points here. It's up to 21. It's a total that's down from 53 to 49.5. So this is a low college football total. And if you're taking 21 points, you're getting 21 points in a game with a 49 total. I mean, that means the odds makers are telling you they don't expect a lot of scoring in this game, so those points are worth a little bit more with a low total like that. So taking that many points does appear to have a good amount of value there because the odds makers are kind of telling you that they don't think Illinois is going to score that much in this game, although they expect Central Michigan to basically not score at all in this game. But all we need them to do is score a little bit, maybe get some junk scoring in there when they're losing, because they're probably going to lose this game. But we just need them to come within 3 touchdowns now at this point in what seems like it's going to be a low-scoring game. Oh, and this game's on Peacock. Isn't that great? So we can watch it if we have Peacock, which I actually do. But I hate all these different streaming services. Illinois is in a sandwich spot, dude. They just came off that big win in that big home game against a ranked Kansas team. Big win there as a home underdog. I told you about that game. I talked about it on my show. Illinois stepped up for it. They played a good game there. I misspoke a second ago, and said it was Kansas State. Excuse me. I keep saying Kansas State or Kansas when I mean the other one. I meant Kansas, which is less impressive, by the way. Illinois beating Kansas is less impressive than beating Kansas State, but it looks impressive because Kansas was ranked 19th, but Kansas, they're not as good as Kansas State, and I don't know that Kansas is really that good, and we just saw Kansas lose tonight to UNLV as a 9.5-point favorite or whatever. At home, they lost outright to UNLV, so how good is Kansas really? Probably not that good, but Illinois, I think, is riding that high off of that because they beat a ranked Kansas team at home. Now they get one of the lower FBS teams, a MAC team coming into their house, Central Michigan. I think Illinois could easily overlook them because they've already had their home opener or whatever. And who do they have up next? They have to go to Nebraska to start Big Ten play. So that's the start of conference play. That's a big game, dude. Nebraska's ranked. They're playing well to start the season. They seem to be a program that's up on the rise again. Nebraska, that's going to be a big game for Illinois. So I think they could easily overlook Central Michigan. And not only is that a big game, but that game's also a primetime Fox game on Friday. So that's on Friday night primetime, dude. So that also tends to be a bigger game, whether you're coming off of that Friday night game or you're looking ahead to that Friday night game. That's a little bit of a bigger game, man. It just adds a little bit of emphasis to that game. So I think they're going to be looking ahead to that. They got a short week upcoming. They got to play Nebraska on Friday rather than Saturday, and then Penn State after that too. So that's a pretty big look-ahead spot. This is a sandwich spot. This game is sandwiched in between 3 ranked opponents. I think it's a bad spot for Illinois. I'm going to take the points with Central Michigan, and Central Michigan, They're coming off just a horrendous, disgusting-looking loss at Florida International. Florida, Illinois, what the hell? Florida International, where they lost 52-16. What the hell, dude? Nobody's going to watch Central Michigan after they lose like that to an FIU team that's pretty bad. I mean, that's disgusting. Central Michigan was actually a favorite in that game on the road, and they lost that badly. But look at what happened in this game, man. Central Michigan outgained Florida Illinois in the game, out-first down them, out-possessed them. They basically dominated Florida International. I keep saying Illinois, Florida International. Statistically, it's getting too late for me, man. They dominated them statistically in this game, but they had 6 turnovers. So, yeah, I wonder why they lost. 6 turnovers. I mean, this is a completely misleading result here, man. 6 turnovers. Give me a break. I don't think that's going to happen again. I mean, that's such an outlier type of game there. Central Michigan is not even close to as bad as they looked in that game, and I think they're going to have the motivation here. That game was so ugly that I think they're going to be pissed off, too, and maybe they were unfocused because they were looking ahead to this game, because this is a bigger game for Central Michigan, dude. They don't play too many of the bigger conference teams throughout the course of the season. So playing a Big Ten team like Illinois, that's going to be a game that they have circled, man, and they're going to want to show up for it. So it's a lesser game as far as Illinois is concerned, and it's a bigger game for Central Michigan. And to top it off, look at the box score here for Illinois against Kansas last week. Kansas actually outgained Illinois and out-first down them and didn't outpossess them, but the possession was close. Kansas had 4 turnovers in that game, so Illinois was +3 in turnovers. So that result was a bit misleading too, because Illinois actually didn't even really outplay Kansas in that game. So maybe I wasn't totally right about it, even though I said I just liked Illinois to cover the spread as an underdog in that game. But so you have both teams coming off misleading results in last week's game, man. Illinois had the benefit of +3 turnover margin, and Central Michigan had the detriment of a -6 turnover margin. So those both misleading results. Central Michigan +21 is the first play. Next play is, we're starting to get even uglier here. Yeah, Florida, Illinois. Why did I keep saying that? It does sound better. It's more, it sounds more native, more Native American, more Indian. UAB +23.5 is my next play. Oh, man. Man, when you play college football, you want to find like the spots that are actually the good spots and find value. You're going to be on some ugly looking teams to cover some numbers. And usually I'm not on that many teams to cover spreads that are over 20 like this, but I just can't help myself in spots like this. I'm going to take UAB in this one. That's against Arkansas. Arkansas is up from 21 to 23.5. You can find UAB +23.5 out there at some spots right now. Arkansas obviously is going to be the team drawing the public action because they're an SEC team, so everybody's going to prefer them over a not very good UAB team, who's one of the kind of mid-majors in FBS. I forget where they're even at. What are they, in Conference USA or something? I don't even know where they're at now. Arkansas's got 83% of the tickets, so they are quite heavily public, but only 56% of the cash. So Arkansas, I mean, market indicators are on the UAB side there. Arkansas is public, and they have a lot less of the cash than the tickets on them. And the same went for the other game I just talked about, where Central Michigan has actually the higher percentage of the cash on them, whereas Illinois has the ticket percentage on them. In this spot, Arkansas is just so heavily public that they still have more. They have the majority of the cash as well, but way less of the cash than the tickets on them, which indicates that some of the bigger bets are on UAB. And I think I can tell you why. Let's look at Arkansas here. No, not Arkansas State, although they're facing Michigan. Michigan's coming off that ugly loss to Texas, by the way, where everybody's just trashing Michigan and saying Michigan's totally dead. They're totally done. Obviously, Michigan's not going to repeat as champion, but I don't think they're as bad as people say they are. So I expect Michigan to start improving a bit over the course of the season. And Texas, of course, after they smash Michigan, you're probably not going to find much value on Texas right now, even though they are one of the better teams in college football. Let's look at Arkansas here for a minute and look at the spot that they're in. And I'm going to say that this is a sandwich spot. They came off a ridiculous-looking 70-0 win over Arkansas Pine Bluff, who is, even though they're one of the little brothers, I guess, in the state of Arkansas, they're an FCS team, and they are a very low-tier FCS team, and Arkansas just completely had their way with them, whatever. Then Arkansas had their first real game of the season. Tough game on the road. They went to a ranked Oklahoma State team here, and look at this game, man. So even though, yes, the score is actually misleading, the fact that they lost that game, Arkansas completely outplayed Oklahoma State yardage-wise and lost the turnover battle badly. And yes, I am still playing against Arkansas here, which is maybe a little bit dangerous just because this loss doesn't make it look like Arkansas dominated the game as much as they did, even though they did. They lost the turnover battle by 2. They should have won the game, but they didn't. But regardless of all that, that was still a big game for Arkansas, and I think they're going to be in a letdown spot or hangover spot. They were a 10.5-point underdog, dude, and they went into Oklahoma State, and they played a really good game, and they had a huge lead in the game. Look at this. They were over 90%, according to the projections, to win the game in the fourth quarter, and then they wound up losing in double overtime. So they're also coming off a game where they played 2 overtimes, so that's going to have you gassed as well, coming off a 2 overtime game, which that also applies to Oklahoma State, by the way. I don't know who they're playing this week. I forget, but it wasn't one that I was really as interested in fading Oklahoma State. But Arkansas, yeah, they're coming off double overtime, and look at this, man. They were beating Oklahoma State as an underdog, beating them. They outplayed them statistically. They had the lead, back and forth, fourth quarter, just tons and tons of scoring, back and forth, tied game. No scoring in the first overtime somehow, and then they lose on a touchdown in double overtime. That's got to take something out of you, man. When you know you played a really good game like that as Arkansas, as a big underdog against a ranked Oklahoma State team in a tough environment like that, had to go to 2 overtimes, you come off that, I think you're going to be in a hangover spot. You're going to not feel great about that. You're thinking you should have won that game, and I think that's going to mentally hurt, man. I don't think that's a great spot for Arkansas. And then also Arkansas, I said it was a sandwich spot, and it is, because up next they have Auburn next week. So they have to go on the road to Auburn, even though this is going to be sort of their, I don't know if they would consider this to be their official home opener. This is their first home FBS game, but they did already play at home against Pine Bluff. I don't know, but they have Auburn up next. They start SEC play next, man. So that's a big game too against Auburn. So I think in a spot like that, that's a sandwich spot, and they could overlook UAB and not be focused enough. And you're asking them to cover a large number in this game. I don't know. Even though they had a really nice offensive performance against Oklahoma State, they lost that game in just horrendous fashion. That, again, that's really got to kind of beat you down and like rip your heart out the way they lost that game to Oklahoma State. This doesn't look like a good spot to me at all for Arkansas. UAB, on the other hand, I think they're going to step up for this game. Look at what they just did after they beat Alcorn State, which, hey, Steve McNair's alma mater. R.I.P. to Steve. That documentary was interesting, I would say, the one that came out on Netflix recently. Alcorn State, they don't have McNair anymore, obviously. They are not very good right now. UAB beat them. Who cares? And then UAB had this hideous performance against UL Monroe. I don't know what that even was. UAB was a huge favorite in that game. They were a 10.5-point favorite. So you have Arkansas, who played really well and probably should have won the game as a 10.5-point underdog and stepped it way up. UAB was a 10.5-point favorite in their game, and they played like absolute ass and lost the game, and they actually got outplayed. But this was also a misleading result because they had 3 turnovers in the game. Even though they didn't play that well, the game should have at least been close, which it wasn't at all. So this is a misleading result, though, because of the 3 turnovers. The game was a lot closer than the final score looked. I think UAB is going to be pissed, and I think that maybe they were looking ahead to this big SEC game they had coming up against Arkansas. This is a big game on UAB's schedule, man. They're going on the road to face one of the big dogs, one of the SEC teams. UAB, I think, is going to have more reason to be focused in this one and to bounce back from just that horrible loss there that they just had. Whereas, of course, Arkansas played that game where it was just emotional, just effort the whole way. UAB just had a game where they just basically didn't even show up, and it was just over, and it was just awful for them. So UAB is in the much better spot here. The situation dictates the play on UAB. So I'm on UAB in that one. Let's see what else we got here. 2 other plays. I'm up to almost an hour. I'm going to get this done in just a little bit over an hour, I think, so that's not too bad. We got another sandwich spot, I believe. How about that? All sandwiches all the time from me. And there were a couple of sandwiches, like I said, that I left off of my card, including Texas State last night, which wound up being it wouldn't have been a win for me, although it was close. Maybe it should have been. I almost played that one. I'm going to play Rice. How about that? Rice plus 4.5. I like this one as well, obviously, because I'm playing it. I think this is a sandwich spot. Houston is their opponent. It's at Houston. Houston's down from 5 to 4.5, and they're a little bit public, 56% of the tickets, even though it looks like they have 73% of the cash right now. But I'm not sure that I buy it. I'm not sure that by game time we won't see that cash discrepancy kind of moving in the other direction, because I only see reasons to play Rice in this game, man. The public is going to be a little bit off of Houston somewhat because I believe Houston played a really ugly game in their first game of the season. They're 0-2 right now, but Houston is in total rebuilding mode, dude. I mean, they're a down program right now, so that is one reason to actually go against them. But they looked ugly in that game against UNLV, but that game might actually not look as bad now that UNLV just went into Kansas and beat them. And I think Kansas was still ranked, or maybe they had just fallen out of the rankings because of the loss to Illinois, but UNLV doesn't look that bad with the fact that they went into Kansas and beat them. So that loss to UNLV doesn't look as bad now. But Houston, they did that, and then look at what they did last week. They went to ranked Oklahoma, which is a really difficult place to play. And Houston is now in the Big 12. I think this might be their first season in the Big 12, or maybe last season was. Were they in it last season too? I don't know, but that's still a big game. They went into Oklahoma, and they were a huge underdog in that game. They were 27.5-point underdog, and they played them to a 4-point game and only lost 16-12. And they were within 2 points in the into the fourth quarter. They were within 2 points until the final couple minutes of the game when they took a safety to try to get the ball back or something. I don't know what happened there, but that was a 14-12 game, almost to the wire. So Houston basically took Oklahoma to the wire as almost a 28-point underdog on the road. What is Houston going to have left coming off of that game? And that was at least a very good defensive performance out of Houston, even though Oklahoma's having to deal with their new quarterback in there. But they have a quarterback who at least came up through their system and is the successor to Dylan Gabriel there, I believe, who is now on Oregon, I think. I don't know. With the transfer portal, it's tough to keep track of where everybody is. But Houston, yeah, they're coming off a huge game. And I said it was a sandwich spot, and it is, because they're facing Cincinnati next, which is not the start of Big 12 play, because they had an early start to Big 12 play because they already played Oklahoma. Or no, Oklahoma ditched. What am I saying? Oklahoma ditched the Big 12. Holy crap, I'm so messed up right now. I'm so used to them being in the Big 12. Oklahoma's actually in the SEC now. I was going to say, like, conference play started early for Houston. No, Oklahoma is in the SEC, but that's still a huge game for Houston, man, because Houston moved into the Big 12. Oklahoma left the Big 12. So these Big 12 teams still want to go and beat Oklahoma, man, because it's like, oh, you're too good for us, and you went to the SEC, who everybody touts as like the biggest conference, the best conference of football, which I don't think there's any argument that it is the best conference. Big 12, Big 10 are the other two big ones, which one of them is the second best. It's debatable which, probably. So, but either way you look at it, that's a huge game for Houston. And that means that game against Cincinnati next, that's a big game because that is actually their Big 12 opener coming up next week at Cincinnati. And Cincinnati might be kind of almost a natural rival of Houston now, because both of those teams entered the Big 12 at the same time. So there's that little bit of like competition there between Houston and Cincinnati, because they both came into this conference at the same time, I'm pretty sure. So that still is a big game for them. And they got Big 12 play starts, and then there's kind of no let up after that. And they play in ranked Iowa State after that, etc. So this is like the least opponent that they have left on their entire schedule, man, in Rice. And I think Rice is going to get up for this, because guess what? Rice is not only an in-state little brother, but they're an in-city little brother. The University of Rice University, is in Houston. So Rice considers Houston to maybe even be kind of their biggest big brother rival, because Houston is kind of the biggest boy in the city of Houston, I believe, at the very least. So Rice is usually going to step it up when they play Houston, man, because they have that chip on their shoulder. They're the little brother in the city of Houston. So they're playing the University of Houston. Rice is going to step it up when they play Houston, man. So I think that's one motivational factor for Rice. Rice is coming off a game where they blasted another Houston team in Texas Southern. But Texas Southern No one cares. I mean, they're a lesser team. They're an FCS team. They're in what? The SWAC or whatever. Nobody cares about that. Rice has played all in-state opponents so far, and in their first game, they got hammered by Sam Houston State, and I think Sam Houston probably considers them to be a little brother of Rice, because Sam Houston, I think, is one of the, I think, newer teams to FBS football, whereas Rice has been in FBS for a longer period of time now. So that game, Rice was a 9.5-point favorite in that game, and they lost horribly to Sam Houston. And Rice had 2 turnovers in that game, so the final score was maybe a little bit misleading because of that, even though Sam Houston did outplay them. And I don't think Sam Houston is actually that bad a team, really. But Rice, losing that game, I think Rice is still going to be playing with a chip on their shoulder from that, too, because I don't think they care about beating Texas Southern, even though Texas Southern is a little brother to them in the city of Houston. Rice comes off of that, and now Rice is the little brother against Houston. So Houston's in a bad scheduling spot. Rice, I think, is the team that should have more motivation. And if anything, I think this line looks a little suspect, right? Even though Rice is a team that has 1 win. Again, it was against Texas Southern, so nobody's going to care about that. Rice has faced the easier schedule so far, obviously, because Houston has faced Oklahoma. So they've faced the more difficult schedule so far, quite clearly. So the public is still going to be on Houston because they're the bigger name of these two teams. They're in the bigger conference. They played the tougher schedule so far, even though the public's a little bit off of them because they're an 0-2 team right now. But even so, public is still on them a little bit, and I expect the cash discrepancy to kind of, I think, move towards Rice more so as we see, as before this game gets going tomorrow. So the first 2 games I talked about are in the afternoon. One's at 12, one's at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Now we're getting into the night games. This is 8 p.m. Eastern. That's going to be a play on Rice plus 4.5. And to finish it off, Wyoming plus 10. We're going into the later night slate. I'm not going as late as these 10:30 games, and I am going to a 9 p.m. game between BYU and Wyoming. I'm going to play Wyoming in this one. BYU's up from 8.5 to 9.5. They were at 10. I think you could still find 10s out there. I think they're more sporadic now, but I did see some 10s still hanging around out there, even though the predominant number is 9.5. Obviously, the 10, a little bit of a key number in football. You'd rather have the 10 than the 9.5. I don't know if it's going to matter because this total is low, dude. 39.5 up to 40.5. Slight move upward on the total. It looks like there is some play on the over there. Rice, Houston, by the way, we're taking an underdog in that one, and that total's 44.5. So that's a low total as well. I don't even know what the total was in the Arkansas game, if I can spell it right. That total's higher, 61, but you're taking 23 points in that one, so I don't know. But these other 3 games where I'm taking the underdog, these are all low totals, dude. This is a very low total for college football at 40.5, so the odds makers kind of indicating there's not going to be a lot of scoring here. So the points are going to be at a premium, and you're getting Wyoming getting 10 points basically at home as an underdog in a game that's expected to have a low total like this. Give it to me, man. That means those points are worth more. 65% of the tickets are on BYU. Obviously, the public's going to come in on BYU. They know they're the better football program. They're the better team, as the odds makers are telling you, obviously. But the spread is the great equalizer, obviously. So that's why you want to come in on these underdogs, man, because the spread is why you're taking these underdogs. You're getting all those points, so you don't need them to win the game. Odds makers are telling you who they think is going to win the game. You ask me who I think is going to win the game, the answer is still going to be BYU, but we want Wyoming to come within these points, man. So that's what I'm doing. And when I take these underdogs, when it's less than 10 points, I actually sprinkle 10% of my bet on the money line on those underdogs. So I take 90% and put it on the spread bet. And just for that little extra, I do put 10% of it on the money line. But when it's a bigger spread, like those 20 whatever point spreads, when it's above 10, I sprinkle 1% on the money line just in case it just hits on the money line. I don't want to throw money away, but I just kind of like throw $10 on it or whatever on the money line. Just the massive majority of my bet's going to be on the spread there. But just in case it happens, I don't want to feel like left out. I don't want FOMO. And I think it's worth it in the long run. If you're playing a team to cover the spread, you are basically inherently saying that you do think that their odds are better than the odds that you're getting to actually win the game outright too, as slim as those odds may be. So it does make sense to just throw a little bit of that money on the money line, a small amount. Anyway, back to this game, BYU, Wyoming, 65% of tickets on BYU, 53% of the cash, however, on the Wyoming side. So again, the market read is on this side, the side that I'm on here with Wyoming. You got a 2-0 team in BYU against an 0-2 team, so the public obviously is going to come in on that 2-0 team. But let's look at the schedule, man, for BYU. They're now in the Big 12, and what did they just do last week? They went into SMU, man, I mean, they are a much better team, I think, than they've looked so far. This SMU team, they have a lot of returning starters from last year, and I don't know what is up with SMU right now, like almost losing to Nevada to start the season and then losing at home to BYU. BYU upset them as a 12.5-point favorite, man, going into SMU and beating them like that as an underdog. And this was also a primetime game. BYU, I believe it was one of those isolated primetime games. It was an ESPN2 game last week. So BYU, I think they're going to be riding high off of that. That was a big game, man. I think they're going to be a little bit overconfident. They win and they pulled off a big upset as a double-digit underdog in prime time in an isolated game that everybody was watching. So that's going to mean the public is going to tend to be more on BYU. It means that you're probably getting less value on BYU because the odds makers are probably going to have to skew the line a little bit more just because everybody saw BYU go into SMU and beat them as an underdog. So I think BYU is in a letdown spot coming off of that, but not only are they in a letdown spot, but look at who they have next week. Oh, yeah, they start Big 12 play. I think BYU did enter the Big 12 last season, if I'm not mistaken. I think they might have been in the Big 12 already. But they have Big 12 play starting next week, man. And this is going to be their home Big 12 opener against Kansas State. That is a big game, man, against a ranked Kansas State team. I think they could look right past Wyoming in a spot like this. And it's their second straight road game. They had to go down to Texas, to Dallas, and now they have to go up to Wyoming. Although BYU themselves, they do play not that far from Wyoming, but even so, a second straight road game, that's not the easiest spot to be in, man, for BYU. So, doesn't look like a great spot for BYU there. It's a sandwich spot, so I like that. And then you got Wyoming, who's 0-2 so far, and Wyoming's going to be itching for a win, man. And this is basically their biggest game on their schedule because they have one of the big guys, a Big 12 team coming into their house. I think they're going to step up for it. And what did Wyoming do last week? They played that Idaho team that somehow played a close game in week 1 against Oregon. I don't know how that happened. But Wyoming actually outplayed them statistically. So this score is a little bit misleading. There were no turnovers. Just Wyoming outplayed them a bit yardage-wise. I don't know how they wound up losing the game, but Wyoming was a favorite at home of 6.5 against an Idaho team that's been relegated to FCS, but still they are a team that was in the FBS for a while. They're probably one of the better FCS teams because they were just in FBS, but still, Wyoming was a home favorite and lost that game. Starting the season 0-2, they lost as an underdog on the road to Arizona State in the first game, which you can't really blame them for that. Arizona State's been playing pretty decent football to start the season, but this is a kind of an embarrassing loss at home. I think they're going to want to shake that loss and turn it around, and maybe they were looking ahead to this BYU game, so I think Wyoming's going to put together a much better performance in this one. It's expected to be a low-scoring game. You're getting a lot of points at home. So for all those reasons, I like the spot there, man. I like Wyoming to cover in that one. And I think that is it. And that's going to do it for me. I think, so I'm playing, what am I playing? 3 road teams and 1 home team here. So we don't have any other spots where a team is playing a second straight road game, although some of the other games I talked about might have second straight road games where that tends to be a difficult spot as well. So you might want to look to go against those teams as well. That's going to do it for me, man. Thanks for hanging out in the chat, guys. College football week 3, one more time. My plays: Central Michigan plus 21, UAB plus 23.5, Rice plus 4.5, Wyoming plus 10. Always going with the dogs, man. The dogs, hopefully they're going to be barking again. Week 2 tends to be better than basically any other week for me, but come on, let's go. Let's get some wins here. College football has been my worst sport over the last 2 seasons, and I don't know why that's been the case because I'm usually decent at handicapping football. I don't know why that's been the case in the past. I've been good at both college football and NFL, so let's get some turnaround here, and let's turn the rest of this year around because I'm still down on the year by a bit, and I want to get back to at least the break-even point. I want to have a slight win this year just so I can continue that track record of only having 1 losing year in 2015, going all the way back to 2008. That was my only losing year. So let's get it done, man. Yeah, Peace JC, Peace Nancy, Scoreboard, yeah. Computer programmer, yes. Pulling data off of sites into Excel. I mean, that is not something specifically that I excel at. I mean, the interfacing with like external APIs and stuff, I do that. Like making API calls to other platforms, like that is definitely part of what I do. I'm like an app developer, like that is part of my job. I'm a web app developer for the most part, but it's not like for phone apps, for mobile apps. I'm not like a mobile developer. I'm more of like a not quite like a website developer, but it is like, it winds up kind of being a website, but I'm kind of doing like the underlying like app development for that particular website. So it's still like, I'm a Java developer for the most part, and I do a lot of the like interfacing with third-party platforms and APIs and stuff and bringing data in. So I do that stuff. I'm not good at Excel though, I will tell you that. So I don't know, whatever the case may be, but I do full stack as far as all the other stuff. I do database stuff. I do like DevOps stuff, like working with stuff in the cloud and stuff like that. Yeah, like managing like where all the apps and the databases run and all that type of stuff. And then the full stack of the actual app development from database layer, whatever, service layer, logic, all the way up through, yeah, like the whole model view controller thing, and all the way up to doing like UI stuff as well, even though I'm probably better at back end than anything else. But yeah, that is what I do. All right, man. Thanks for hanging out, guys. It's a late night, but I'm probably still not going to go to sleep right away, even though I have a dentist appointment in the morning. So that's going to be a lot of fun. It's not a root canal, though, so at least there's that. It's just a cleaning, but still, hate the dentist. Thanks, guys, for hanging out. I'm Tower Gang Toad. Of course, follow me on Twitter. You can get my sports takes, my political shit posting, my other shit posting, jokes, whatever. If you know me, you know what my Twitter feed is all about. And you know that I am on the Tower Gang podcast every Wednesday at 9:11 p.m., the most offensive podcast on the planet. Go follow us there. Hilarious time. We're on basically all the platforms. You'll find us if you find Tower Gang or Tower Gang Pod. You go to towergang.com, I think, at this point, and our link tree is there, and that'll be all the links. You can throw us some money, some support at the Patreon if you want to, which I always forget what it is, but it is patreon.com/towergang. I'm pretty sure. So you can throw us some support there as well. We're on Rumble, YouTube, Odyssey. You can find us at all the different places, Spotify after the fact. And, of course, I always shout out the boys at flapper.net, FLAPPR.net. They are like me. They also do political shit posting. They have a blog. They have a Twitter. They have a YouTube channel. They do, like, historical documentary videos with kind of a more humorous take to those things and political take. More of a political angle to it. So they do a lot of the same stuff. They talk about women even more so than I do probably, and they talk about sports as well. Thanks for hanging out, guys. Have a good one. Let's have a good Saturday. This has been one of my longest videos. Hopefully some good info here, and hopefully we get some wins. Peace out.